Hello and welcome to the LLG vlog. I'm Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Helen.
So, Dennis, what's our topic of conversation this week?
Well, I'm highlighting this week the announcement of the introduction of police contacts for election candidates. Now, this is this announcement by the Home Office that elected representatives and their candidates will be given named police contact. This is for the first time for security matters. Now, this announcement came from the Home Office. It said the move was part of a £31 million investment to protect democratic processes from disruption. And as we know, this comes when the political climate is, how shall I put it, tense. It's the run-up to the national and local elections. And it's in this setting, and particularly with the pressures in Parliament during a number of debates recently, that this announcement has been made. This seems to me to be the first positive recognition, the first positive step by government to recognise the what's been said many times now over a long period by the Local Government Association about the feedback they get from councillors at all their levels, that through the Debate Not Hate campaign, that abuse is a real problem and it needs attention and it needs solutions that involve the police. And back to this investment that's been mentioned, the Home Office have said it'll be used to enhance police capabilities, increase private sector security provisions for those facing a higher risk, and to expand cyber security advice for locally elected representatives. So I think this is a big announcement. It needs to be taken in the context that it is in the run-up to these major elections, where, quite frankly, it is anticipated that the atmosphere will become increasingly febrile. So this is good news from the point of view of the Debate Not Hate campaign, but the LG have campaigned for far more than just this. But this is a first step, and it's a positive step, Helen.
Well, it is a first step, and it is positive. Although I was going to say it's a shame that it's needed. Actually, it's appalling.
Indeed.
It's appalling that it's needed. That we find ourselves now in a space where people who are volunteering their time to represent their communities are facing such, well, it's more than challenging, isn't it? It's hostile environments. I know
it is.
The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has said that the government wants to take every possible step to safeguard the people, processes and institutions upon which democracy relies. And I'm going to quote him. He says, "I take the safety and security of all members of the House with the utmost seriousness. None of us should have to accept that enduring hate crimes, harassment or threats is part of the job. But for many people, that is the reality." And in fact, there was a not Panorama, but there was a focused news report in relation to it. It was Newsnight that discussed it and took first-hand evidence from councillors about the sheer vitriolic abuse that they're suffering, Dennis.
Yes. I take this as a very clear commitment from government. As you say, James Cleverly has been clear about the nature of that commitment. Another minister came forward, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, who said over the past few weeks, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen disgraceful attempts to intimidate MPs and undermine our democratic processes. But I must stress for our viewers that this initiative is for elected representatives right across the board. And he goes on to say that behaviour that he described there is a threat to our democracy and toxic for our society. He went on, "We'll do whatever is necessary to protect those who've been elected to represent their local communities and to defend our democratic freedoms." What the announcement is a bit short on, however, is the detail behind what the police engagement and this new fund will involve. Local police forces will be able to draw upon the fund that's been announced. It's just been described as to surge policing presence in local areas in response to specific events. This is the announcement from the Home Office, as I've said. But what does that mean in practice? The announcement goes on, this will increase support available to vulnerable communities, bolstering police visibility and increasing public confidence. But I don't want to take away from the announcement. It's just that we need more detail on this. And I know, Helen, you've been monitoring the LGA Debate Not Hate programme, and they've had something to say about all of this as well.
Yeah, I have been monitoring that, and actually, LLG have been working with the LGA, to provide some input in relation to that. And indeed, we went out with our own survey, which just demonstrated what we know about the state of abuse faced not just by councillors but officers actually, and monitoring officers as well are in the firing line increasingly. And I'm sure a number of our members will be all too aware of that, but the chair of the local government association civility and public life, they've got a steering group, and that's a councillor, Marianne Overton. She said that obviously they're pleased that the government has taken steps to provide improved protections for elected officials in light of concerning rise in levels of abuse, and that locally elected representatives will have dedicated police support for security matters for the first time. And that's something they've long called for. And they've said that their recent analysis, and they looked at this 4 years ago, and it's deteriorated further. 8 out of 10 councillors, 8 out of 10, felt personally at risk while fulfilling their elected role last year. So, it's a downward trend towards, well, an upward trend rather, towards the frequency within which councillors are subjected to this. I am slightly concerned, though, and you said there was a lack of detail, and we don't want to detract from what the government's trying to do, but, the resourcing capabilities and the staffing capabilities of the police, and how in practice this is actually going to be able to make a difference. I think there's got to be a question mark around that, Dennis, I think.
Well, of course, every community has its own priorities, and the police will have their particular priorities dependent upon the nature of activity in their particular areas. And where this fits into that jigsaw is not at all clear. But it is, as you say, an important first step. I've been looking back at the LGA Debate Not Hate campaign, and this was one of 3 things that the LGA were campaigning for. The other 2 concerned pathways for dealing with problems when abuse and harassment and intimidation occur. Councillors are informed about the risks to what they do, but have limited knowledge of tools for effective conflict resolution and what they call aftercare. So that's still an open matter that hasn't been resolved. The other challenge that they raised in their campaign concerned what they see, and indeed we would agree, that there's a lack of a clear process around reporting instances of abuse to the council. Councillors don't know who to turn to when an incident occurs. There's limited understanding about the role and help that supporting officers can provide. And I should add to this, the other elephant in the room is online abuse. We hear, don't we, that many councillors fear engagement on social media and what happens in that environment. Many councillors complain of emails that they receive during campaigns and just acting as a councillor. So that's still an open matter too that hasn't been resolved by any of this at this stage.
No, well, I know that the LGA are really sort of pushing the government and Ofcom to take steps to ensure that harmful, abusive online behaviour doesn't just continue unrestricted, and that there needs to be clear guidance for social media and online service providers. Making them responsible to mitigate and reduce incidents and risks of online abuse. So I know that the experience of councillors and elected members is being considered in the guidance that's mandated by the Online Safety Bill. Ofcom are looking at that, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not they do. And surely there's such overwhelming evidence, you would like to think that they will put that into that guidance, Dennis.
Indeed, I think that's something that's got to be addressed. Interestingly, and a bit of a trailer for next week's Grapevine, there is a case highlighted there, which I'm reporting on, which concerns a malicious communication situation between a town councillor and the local constituent, where the actual conviction was overturned on appeal. And I've gone into this in some detail in the Grapevine next week, and that will demonstrate the real difficulties of bringing cases concerned with malicious communications. It's not straightforward. It's difficult to get a conviction that will stick. it's something that will be of interest to governance officers generally, and they should take a look at that next week. But the criminal law doesn't always provide solutions to some of the situations that councillors find themselves in when dealing with constituents and offensive emails and so on. So watch out for that.
Well, that'd be interesting to listen to, Dennis. But also, when you look at the suite of tools available, quite often for redress, one has to come down on the civil side in terms of, injunctions or trying to prevent behaviour. And of course, I remember from my time in litigation that the civil courts are not well set up at all to deal with aggressive or threatening litigants in person. And in fact, it can be quite dangerous. That's a whole nother subject. But if you're trying to get redress, you actually put yourself at risk by being in that situation, because obviously it's very, very different from the criminal courts.
Yeah. One other thing that I've picked up over recent months is from the LGA material that I've been looking at is there is the hidden damage of the kind of atmosphere that people find themselves in political life. And it's the range of people who never come forward as candidates in elections because they are put off by the environment, by what they see happening in local democracy, national democracy, I'm sure too, it's a factor there. But particularly in local democracy, we've got clear evidence of people from particular backgrounds. Women have also said they do not wish to come forward and expose themselves and their families to the kind of problems that can happen once they become a councillor or get involved in a campaign. So these are some big questions that perhaps this first step may not address. There are a whole raft of other issues that need to be looked at so that we can hold the our democratic processes back to where perhaps they were several years ago, when I cannot recall when I was in local government problems being at the scale and nature that they are now.
No, not at all. And actually, I talk about the additional impact on minority groups in the podcast this week, then especially in relation to online vitriolic abuse. The percentage is far higher than, say, for white males, but we still know, obviously, that abuse occurs against all demographics. And in fact, obviously, there's been some horrific examples in relation to that. So, well, as always, thank you for the discussion, Dennis. And thank you for listening. We'll be there to guide you through the detail in both our Bulletin and our Grapevine podcast throughout the year. But on that note, please do listen to the Grapevine podcast this week. It's quite interesting, and it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.